I think sometime in May 2011. And the value in question was about 2.5 billion naira. So then I asked the question, how many jobs will this importer create locally here? Now, I would be much interested in somebody like that coming to request for a waiver because he has a plan to begin to cultivate here, either through growers or plantations he or she will own directly, and then to process so that what he or she imports today, in another 2-3 years' time, it will be produced locally here. In which case, you'll be creating jobs here. And of course, the demand for dollars, therefore, that this person will use to import rice will no longer be there. That is the way to go. So in which case, if you look at these various sectors, what can we do to ensure that we create more jobs locally here? That's the problem of our economy. That's the summary of it. Okay. The rest of it is just semantics. Naira exchange value, subsidy, removal, and all of this. Get the products available here, and all these issues about price will become not fit for discussion.
Dr. Adedipe, we'll still come back and talk to you a little bit more about some of the issues with regards to central banking in Nigeria. So hold on to your thoughts. We'll be right back. Business Morning continues in just a moment, and the conversation with economist Dr. Biodun Adedipe continues after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. The conversation with economist Dr. Biodun Adedipe continues now. We're focusing on central banking in Nigeria and reviewing the monetary policies and actions that have been taken in recent times. Dr. Adedipe, thank you so much for sticking around. So let's take off from looking at external factors that affect the responsibilities or the day-to-day runnings of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know you've really had close dealings with the regulator lately.
Thank you so very much. Now, there is an interplay between capital control and monetary policy. But the way it goes is to ask a simple question. If you engage in capital control, how will your monetary policy run? Can it be independent? In which case, can you make your policy here without having to worry about what happens in the rest of the world? Now, if you also don't go by way of capital controls, to what extent is your monetary policy independent? Now, there is, we call it the trilemma issue in economics, and that is dealing with the issue of, one, you want financial system stability, okay, but you are looking at the exchange value of your currency, you are looking at the same time at the cost of the domestic currency, which is the interest rate. So now, the challenge there is you cannot put your finger on all of this together at the same time. So in which case you have to prioritize. So now, the direction Central Bank has gone so far is to do two things. One is interest rate, which, of course, the signal rate, as we call it, the monetary policy rate, has been at 13% for quite a while until the last meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, when it reduced it to 12%, right in line with my own thoughts and argument in the last 4 years. I've always canvassed for that you don't desire to grow your economy and make credit expensive. So credit should be cheaper, okay? So now they have gone in the right direction there in terms of reducing it. Then the other side is reducing the cash reserve requirement from 25 to 20%. That freed about 771 billion naira. And Central Bank said, look, we don't want this money to just go like every other money to fund trade, because that is what is the major problem of our economy. They said, rather let it go to the real sector, which means it's in line with my own thinking as to where the money should go. So for me, Central Bank is going in the right direction with respect to all of this. Now, bringing that into the issue of the capital control, as I said earlier on, what they need to add there is this will last only for this period of time. Now, if Central Bank does all of this, I think we'll be in the right direction. The economy is in a crisis. Even the banking system also is somewhat stressed, because the more your customers are unable to meet their obligations to you, the more non-performing loans you have on your balance sheet. And of course, that is trouble for the banks and trouble for the economy as well.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned that, because, you know, there's the inability of companies to source foreign exchange for raw materials, goods and services. What impact is this having, and what are the likely remedies?
Essentially, I would say that, yes, Central Bank came up at a point and said, the following 41 items, I am not going to sell foreign exchange to the customers, but rather go and source your FX elsewhere. perfect. Perfect because it's simply saying that I believe these products can be produced locally or this can be sourced locally. But what I want the central bank to correct there, because in as much as I agree with the direction they are going, they also have some things to correct. What they need to correct there is ask themselves, is there any item in there that happens to be an input into domestic manufacturing? For example, those who are in cultivation of palm in order to produce palm oil locally instead of Nigeria importing. If what goes as input into that process is on that list, it means that needs to be reviewed. If somebody also is a manufacturer of, let's say, containers, and one of his raw materials or inputs is on that list, that also means that manufacturer cannot produce because the raw materials cannot come into the factory. So those are the things they need to review. Yes, right policy direction, but they need to again look at what they have in there to ensure it is in line with the overall objective of growth in the economy.
But just before I let you go, Dr. Adedikwe, very quickly, I don't know if you can take this in 1 minute or so. Are you worried about some of the issues being investigated around the CBN, for instance, the TSA fee and Forex Reserves Management?
You see, for me, the issue of the TSA is making so much noise about it is misplaced. I call it noise. And my reason is because an agreement was signed in 2011. Okay, the agreement said the fee is 1%. This fee will be shared between 3 stakeholders: the provider of the platform, then the banks that are involved, and central bank. So that is what the contract says. So if they now say that, look, there's an issue with that, that means you are reneging on what you agreed to do some 4 years ago. And that brings a whole issue with the rule of law and sanctity of contracts. That's my view about it. The reason there's so much noise about it is because there's a one-time huge transfer. Otherwise, it would have been just little flows that pass through that platform. But then, in which case, the fee implication wouldn't have been much.
But then some organizations have complained that some of the accounts that the monies have been moved have really no business moving those accounts to fall in line with the complying with the TSA from the central bank. It's not a TSA kind of account, so it should be left on its own. So it's almost as if there was no clear specification of which accounts were either for the government or ministries or agencies. They were for just maybe single institutions under those particular ministries. I don't know if you...
Well, you see, once you say MDAs, ministry, departments, agencies of government, they all fall under the same nomenclature. So what we are looking at now is to have one budget that covers everything. So the idea is to bring transparency on the table. And that means whatever you want to spend, it will be clear what you are spending, that is appropriated. Not that an agency stands alone, makes a budget, generates revenue. For example, if you look at this year's budget, just to illustrate, now Federal Inland Revenue Service will generate taxes, and then 25% of that will come into the budget. That is what the government announced for this year's budget, 2015. And I told myself, I've never come across anything like this anywhere in the world. That is gross inefficiency. You generate 100% of taxes, 25% goes to the allocation, and then you retain 75%. That means the cost of collecting 25% that you deliver is 75%, 3 times. That is gross inefficiency. It is that kind of thing that anyone who analyzes our budget will see and say, look, to go the way of TSA, where everything comes into a single purse, then you have your budget approved, and then you can now appropriate accordingly. That will bring transparency and, of course, accountability. I think it's the way Nigeria should go.
It's still in line with that transparency. The House of Representatives has called for investigation into the management of Forex reserves. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the only thing I can say there is that the central bank should come out and tell us from now, in terms of the data they put out to us, tell us how much exactly they have, and discontinue this idea of moving average, which I've criticized in the last 4 years they started doing this, that it kind of misinforms the public. Because the figure you are looking at will remain high if the current figure is low and your historic figure is high. So it's an average. The average will give you an impression that you have more in your reserves. So that is the only thing I want central bank to change there. The rest of it is, as any economist would want it, central bank is on the right course, for me, as an analyst.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adedipe, for joining me on the program and sharing your thoughts with us, of course, on how the monetary policies, actions, central banking, basically, in Nigeria has been. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.